So slavery is another one of these things that is universal. It's regulated and condoned in the Hebrew Bible and the Old Testament. It's something that's condoned in the New Testament as well. Christians and Jews have practiced it, Muslims have practiced it, and even outside of these faiths, you have other cultures that have universally practiced slavery. Now, why is that? Like, slavery, to define it, is like owning another person, but really what it means is that you have the master has certain rights and the slave has certain rights. So in Islam, being a slave doesn't mean that you're like a piece of wood or like an object. Like, you have certain rights, but your master also has certain rights, and you provide labor. But why it's universal is because of war. You know, when you have this all universal aspect of human civilization, which is war. What do you do with the losing side? You know, the losing side, if you just let them go, then they'll just regroup and attack you again. Or, you know, do you kill them? You just kill them all. That would also be something that a lot of civilizations did when they won wars. They just wiped out the entire population. But another thing that you can do is to use that population as labor. And that way you have, like, there's an economic benefit that you get when you win a war. And what happens is that the societies that have more people, the civilizations that have more people, are going to be stronger and stronger because there is technologically primitive. The more people you have, the more likely it is that you can win future wars and you can defend yourself against invading tribes or invading civilizations. So the civilizations or the cities or states that had more people and had more slaves are more likely to win and prevent being wiped out and basically conquered and destroyed. So this is why it's universal. All the major civilizations, they had slaves, and it became like a moral necessity. If you did not have slaves, you were going to get wiped out, because if you just lose the war, or you win a war and you release people that you've conquered for no gain, then the people that do take slaves are going to get stronger and stronger, and then they're going to wipe you out and basically destroy your entire civilization. So it became a moral necessity and a moral need. And so think about it as a weapon of war, like slavery. That labor is a type of weapon of war, in the same way that today you can't imagine a war that could take place without guns and bombs. Imagine
Right.
one side says that, well, guns are immoral, like bombs are immoral because you cause collateral damage, and this is a immoral way to do things. So we should just disregard all bombs, not use them. Any society that says that is immediately going to be wiped out, you know? And so it's immoral to not use that weapon for the survival of your people or your race or religion. But you can imagine in the future, you know, in the future, so there's some new technology, like some space laser technology where you can precisely kill whoever you need to. And they'll say, like, oh, wow, can you imagine 100 years ago they were using bombs? Like, what backwards people? But,
Sure.
you know, that would be a logical or a moral mistake, because you're not taking into effect the technological limitation. And slavery is in the same way. Like, for people to judge slavery as this, I'm not saying that all practices of slavery were good, because just like war is something universal, but you can have people who engage in barbarism, like the IDF, for example. They're engaging in a very barbaric, genocidal type of warfare. We can criticize that without saying that war in itself is something inherently immoral. War is something universal that every civilization has engaged in. And similarly, slavery, is a universal aspect of human civilization. There can be bad aspects of it that immoral actors like engage in transatlantic slavery, and they're literally killing slaves or treating them in barbaric ways. So I in no way endorse any of that. But the institution of slavery is something universal, and it's not necessarily immoral. It's sometimes a moral necessity as a weapon of war, and is needed for survival. So that, in a nutshell, is the defense of slavery.
I understand historical, but are you saying today that's okay? That slavery is today is okay?
Well, Islam doesn't require slavery. Islam, you know, the position is that slavery is just not immoral. The reason that slavery fell out of favor is because of the Industrial Revolution. And basically the steam engine made slaves obsolete. Because an engine can do more than 100 men or 1,000 men. So you don't really need slaves. But if the steam engine, and actually I just had a conversation with Greg Magarshak, which I think you listened to, but in that conversation, he brought up like Islam and slavery. I pointed out that, well, this is in Judaism as well. But then I also pointed out that, okay, imagine that there's a huge solar flare and all the electronics, all the technology goes out the window and we go back to a more primitive state of technology in the world. Slavery then would probably make a really big comeback. And it would be based on warfare. It would be based on all the things that I'm describing, but it's a technological aspect of history that when the industrialization happens, then you don't have slaves. Instead, you have employees. And one thing that some people point out, like Noam Chomsky, you might be familiar with, he said that historically, there's not really a distinction between employee versus slave, because the idea of an employee, like your employer is paying you and then you use that money for food and shelter. That's basically what a master does with a slave. And the only difference is that as an employee, you're like rented by your employer, but a master owns you. So it's the difference between like renting a car and owning a car. And usually when you own a car, you treat it better than a rental. So this was actually the kind of argument that the South made in American history against the North, because they said that, well, yes, we have slavery, but in the North, you have these kinds of wage slaves, and you have these factories where people are working themselves to death. Whereas we treat our slaves very well because they're our property. We don't want to kill them. But with your employees in these northern factories in Boston and New York, when an employee dies, you just replace them with another body.